Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Questioning Behaviour. Today we are actually going to discuss a topic which, surprise, surprise, Sarah and I know very little about, as always.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the dummy that don't believe.
That's the beauty of this podcast. We get to just be complete naive agents in our own field, which is...
Yes.
I mean, it's the truth with everything, really. We don't know anything about anything, but
yeah. We have our respective wheelhouses, but we don't really leave the bubble. As such, we created this podcast.
Exactly.
So today, as you could probably gather from the title of this episode, because, surprise, surprise, the title kind of gives it all away, we're going to be talking to Koen Smets, and we're going to be talking about organizational change. Now, if you don't know Koen, which I would find very surprising if you have any type of social media account and are interested in behavioral science or behavioral economics, Koen is actually known as the accidental behavioral economist because he's made quite a name and a way for himself in this field, however, has no economics nor psychology training from his educational background. So he is my favorite type of behavioral economist or accidental behavioral economist. So I think without much further ado, let's just invite Koen on and let's dive into his crazy brain. Okay, guys. Well, today on the Questioning Behaviour podcast, we are actually talking to Koen Smets, also very much known as the accidental behavioral economist. Koen, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, yes, thanks, and very, very glad to be here on your podcast, Sarah and Mel. I'm an accidental behavioral economist because I'm neither an economist nor a behavioral scientist. I'm an engineer by training, and I did some engineering stuff at the beginning of my career, but then rolled by coincidence into management consulting and in particular organization development. And as an engineer, you come in and you think, this is all about systems and organizing departments and business processes and stuff. And then you run into the difficulty that you actually have real people there who have their own way of deciding what to do and what not to do. And interestingly, my route into behavioral science came through economics, as I've always had an interest in economics as a behavioral science, in the sense that it helps you understand why people do what they do and don't do what they don't do, in terms of the trade-off. So they, even whether it's conscious or not, they make even implicit trade-offs. And I thought that was an interesting and valuable way of looking at organizational behavior, where, of course, there are lots of incentives, you have externalities, there are lots of economics concepts which play out in a non-economic way in the microcosm of an organization. But even that didn't tell me the whole story. And so, beginning of this century, I started getting into, obviously, with Kahneman, and then obviously Nudge and Dan Ariely and so on. And all these insights added to my ability to understand what is going on in organizations and what is not going on, and why is the stuff that should be going on not going on. So that's how I really sort of got absorbed into behavioral science, and particularly applied behavioral science. Since the last sort of 12 to 15 years or so, I've been quite intensely applying behavioral insights in the work that I do with organizations, large and small.
Cool.
But it's all still very accidental.
So, I mean, you've been... I guess, on the behavioral science scene, or you've sort of been an observer or a consumer of behavioral science really from before, anyone else sort of jumped on board, a behavioral science hipster, so to speak. So, I mean...
Well, maybe, but then again, I think in the early days, you probably didn't even realize that there was this community. It was all a few individuals here and there, and you read their books, and then, they wrote articles and so on. So you thought, hey, that's an interesting one. I can use this. I think it for me, it took off. I think maybe it took off twice. I think the Nudge, and then in the UK here, the behavioral science unit, the Nudge unit first, and we have an insights team. That, I think, catalyzed something in this country, but obviously very much focused on the public sector and how to engage citizens to pay tax, to recycle, and so on, public health messages, those kind of things. And then the other thing was marketing, of course, where you could argue with people like Bob Cialdini, who've been doing stuff that really fits well in the whole marketing thing. So it's all about consumers. What I've long thought was missing, and to some extent still is missing, is a similar movement around how to apply behavioral science within an organization, because there is a great need for that as well. And the conventional techniques have their use, but they don't really allow you to understand it in full and to really overlay the forces that guide and drive people's behavior within organizations. So I think the nudge, and then the nudge unit, and then I think with Richard Thaler's Nobel Prize really giving the whole behavioral science scene another boost. I think then you really saw these little islands in many different countries coming together, using social media like Twitter in particular, forming these emerging communities of behavioral scientists. And yes, of course, then I was one of the earlier adopters, I think, of this, trying to, in the first place, trying to learn, which is still very much how I use Twitter, for instance. I mean, I have over the years quite a meticulously curated feed of the people that I follow. And then I share maybe 15% of what I try to absorb. And then occasionally I try to reflect on behavioral observations myself in what I write on my blog.
I think in general, your Twitter feed, if I just go to your Twitter profile, I suppose it's called, I think there is just such a wealth of information there. Like if you wanted to find anything, like either super general or like super niche, very practical from very academic, I think you would be able to find it on your feed. I think you've been throughout the years an absolutely excellent curator for behavioral science. No, absolutely, I love it. I don't follow that many people on Twitter because it just gets too cluttered. But I've always very happily followed. But through the fact, you're very welcome. But through the fact that, like you said before, there has been a very strong focus on public sector work from the get-go. Now that behavioral science has had yet another boost thanks to Thaler's Nobel Prize, have you seen more work being directed towards organizational behavior, or do you still think there's very clear gaps in the market for research to be done?
I think it's still a distant third, I think, behind public policy making and policy implementation and consumer research, marketing, customer interface, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And I think it's understandable because with public policy, you're talking about huge numbers. And so even if you look at the effect size of the work that Behavioral Insights team and their brethren around the world do, I mean, they increase effects from 42% to 49% or something, but that's huge numbers. So in absolute terms, this is great. It's absolutely humongous numbers involved. Likewise, at the market and consumer side, the benefit is immediately tangible. If you can get people to buy more, your turnover goes up, your profit goes up. So there's an easy connection to be made there. I think in organizational change, that has always been not the easiest domain to work in, because the benefit is hard to quantify very often. Usually you get involved in either really serious dysfunction or in specific event-driven situations where there's a merger or there's a big reorganization and you need people to sort of work together in a way that they haven't done before, which I think is interesting for me because there's always nobody knows how to do this, neither do I, but then again, I can't really be compared with the best because nobody's done it before.
Fair enough.
So there is a bit of that. But of course, it comes with its own challenges. I was listening to behavioral grooves over the last week and over the weekend with Jez Groom and April Velicott, and I know Jez. I've known him for some time, and I know the kind of work he's been doing. And he was alluding to work he's done on a building site on health and safety. And he made the point: how the hell do you run a randomized controlled trial on a construction site? And
you tell me.
That resonated so well with me, because you work in an organization, even large organizations like Philips. I've done a lot of work with Philips.
Okay.
But what you find is you work in a bit of Philips with maybe 150 people, but they have different managers, they have different roles. So there's no way you can do randomization in there. So you really need to rely on different ways of applying behavioral insights in that kind of environment, because you don't have the luxury of running a big RCT with 15,000 people in the Midlands, in the Southeast, and in the Northwest, or 4,000 Unilever customers or something, who are almost, or in certain social categories, sort of A, B, C, 1, C, 2. So you can't do that kind of thing in organizations. So you really need to combine the raw insights, what we know about what drives people's behavior, the multiple tendencies and biases, and some kind of reading of how that organization really works. So you almost need to say, well, I don't think that's going to work here, because I've spoken to a few people and it doesn't feel right. And if you'd asked me, okay, can you really explain why you think it won't work? I would find that very hard. It's kind of 30 years of experience that tells me it doesn't smell right. I don't think it's going to go. I think this is likely an intervention that's likely to be more successful. And it's a source of frustration, because also you rarely have the opportunity to say, you know what, we're going to do a sort of a time-lapse study. Let's try this for 3 months and then something else. But your clients don't really want any of it. So very often, I don't even go in and say, you know what, I'm going to be using behavioral science here. I just don't say that. I say, you need organization change. I will do organizational change with you, but not say, ooh, and I do behavioral science as well as part of my organizational change. It's not a major thing in my marketing of my services. For that reason, it doesn't engage people in the same way as it would engage people in the public sector or in marketing, and so I use marketing in the widest sense of the word.
Sure.
Yeah.
So why is that? Why is it not engaging to, for example, a company like Philips? Is it because of the restrictions that you just mentioned? It's figuring out how to run an experiment or a trial on like 150 people, God knows where, who report to God knows whom.
Yes, exactly. So they have a limited budget, and even more so limited time. They want something implemented quickly, and so the starting position is very different, because I think it is not about changing the behavior of very many people a little bit. It's often changing the behavior of not that many people quite a lot.
I see.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah, the requirements are different. So it's for me, it's almost more a case of really dipping into all my experience and my knowledge and sort of picking what I think might work, and then just trying it in and see if it does work indeed. And often it does work, but sometimes in unexpected ways. You think, oh, I didn't realize that was going to work so well. But yeah, it seems to work here. So you just store it and say, I must remember that, because it might come in handy sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think like it's a really good point about the fact that oftentimes things don't work, right? And you have good intentions, you have the insights, you have the research behind you that says, okay, we may have or experience that this might work here, but a lot of the time it doesn't. And I think that surprises some people, because we have, we only really publish those positive results. We only really share when things go well, the success stories. So, it's difficult, because it's not as though, with all the hindsight in the world, you could say, okay, we shouldn't have done that because it didn't work. But is there a sense that we need to normalize failure more within behavioral science, or is that going to be even more off-putting, do you think, for customers of behavioral science?
Yeah, I think it depends to whom. I think there is a general dislike of uncertainty, I think, in society as a whole. and more than I remember, sort of 10, 20, 30 years ago. When I don't know, maybe I'm making it up, but it does feel as if there's a sort of general risk aversion. People don't want to try anything; they want to be certain it's going to work. And so coming up with, well, actually, this has failed 4 times out of 7. It worked 3 times out of 7. What do you think? Should we try? No. Let's try something that really works. And I think we live in a bit of an illusion, especially, social sciences in general. It's a black art rather than a science in many ways. You can't really sort of say, well, here are the equations. You just work it out, and this is going to be the outcome. On the other hand, I think, and I think it is Ideas 42 that have a database of public sector interventions. And I've been sort of one of my sort of more vague projects, that sort of dream project would be to set up something similar for applications of behavioral science in organization development environments.
Please do.
Well, it's easier said than done, of course, because
of course.
You run into disclosure problems. How many companies would really be willing to share what they tried in their organization to change, and especially if it failed? Mm-hmm. But I think it would be interesting to at least try to generate some initial momentum around it with organizations that are willing to share on some kind of basis, and to say, okay, well, this was our problem. This is what we wanted to do. This is what we tried. That didn't work. We tried something else. That worked, but only there. It worked, for instance, in sales, but it didn't work in development. We still don't know why. And then maybe some others say, well, that's interesting because we tried this and it worked in development, and we think it's. And I think some kind of peer supporting network of people who focus on organization change within organizations, to share what they tried, to try and achieve what aim, and then to look at what worked and didn't work and try and explore why. I think that would be quite valuable. And of course, it would not generate certainties, but it would generate insights that I think would be useful for people to say, ooh, that worked there. I will consider this and I will see if I can translate this. So I think the whole idea of translating and retranslating things from elsewhere is really what you need to do in organizations. So it's not, ooh, they did it this here, I'll do exactly the same here, like incentives or whatever. You need to think about how it translates. It's like almost like different national cultures. How people perceive elders, for instance, is very different in Southern Europe or in the Far East compared to Northern Europe. And these things are often not even being made explicit. And so you come in there and you think, oh yeah, we're going to try this. And then you find out it doesn't work because, for instance, people find family very important to the point of behavior that others might see as corruption. Right. Where they really pull family members in and say, no, I'll appoint you there, a bit like what Donald Trump has been doing in the White House. But in certain cultures, this is totally acceptable. In others, it isn't. And you need to get an understanding of what all these contextual factors are that influence to what extent any behavioral intervention would work. And so the whole idea of being able to take a certain bias or a certain effect and say, oh yeah, we're going to use loss aversion and that's going to work here. Of course, it's never going to work like that, because it is very, very rare for one effect only to be applicable in any context. There's always others that might amplify it and even others that might attenuate it and make completely backfire or go away. And I think it's a matter of experience, creativity, I don't know what else, to get a sense of what am I going to use and what's going to work. It's a bit like the ready, steady, cook. So you need to cook something.
I love that.
You have some ingredients, and then you need to figure out how you're going to use them to make something that makes sense. And you need to be a pretty good cook to come up with something that's not just edible, but actually quite pleasant to consume on ready, steady, cook.
Or in my case, just vaguely resembles food.
Yes. But so you can't really. There is no textbook sequence of steps that you can go through to get from problem to solution. You really need to try things out, be totally comfortable with ambiguity, with saying, well, how about if we try like this, and could it be done as well? Yeah, okay, let's just brainstorm how this works. So there's a lot of fuzziness in applied behavioral science within organizations. I think more so than when you do public policy or when you do consumer interface marketing, those kind of things.
Yeah, you're dealing with like cultures within cultures, really. Each firm, each company is its own beast, its own system with all these like unspoken rules and things like that. So, I mean, a resource like what you're talking about would be incredibly valuable. I mean, I would also love if there were also, I don't know, a paragraph next to the intervention, sort of the instructions, I guess, or the recipe in Ready, Steady, Cook of how the insight was actually implemented, sort of the actual process of how did you introduce it, at what time, these sort of things that could allow replication or could give a better understanding of why things do or don't work potentially. So I mean, that would be amazing. Not an easy feat, of course, but
no. And I think what for me, what it will take for this something like this to happen is that people with my kind of experience and focus, either as an external consultant or as an internal consultant, or just a manager who takes an interest to say, okay, well, in my department, it's quite difficult to manage. How about if I try to apply some behavioral insights to control it better, to manage it better? I think as more and more of people from that nature come on the scene, there will be an opportunity, I think, to set something up like this. I think there are still big challenges in terms of what you can disclose, what you can't disclose. How can you anonymize these things? It really is quite hard. I think that's the kind of problem you don't have in public policy, because the nudge units are only too happy to share what they did to get people to pay tax, pay their fines, to recycle more and what have you. But within organizations, it's a bit more tricky. But I mean, it's the kind of thing that informally happens at conferences, where you get to talk to somebody and say, hey, okay, well, yeah, we merged together with the company, really big cultural differences, but we managed to get people aligned on something and then work together. And before you knew it, something really interesting started happening. But it's one thing to have these informal conversations over a coffee in a break. And it's another thing to actually document it in a way that is, as you say, Sarah, is useful in the sense that it actually codifies the problem, the context, the interventions, the controls, etc. So I continue to dream, but hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, that dream might become reality. Let's hope so.
So given that often it is, not possible to randomize effectively or to implement sort of a randomized controlled trial within the firm setting, which is sort of been the sort of status quo for how do we apply behavioral insights. Let's run an RCT. That's sort of the model that we've seen in public policy and in advertising and things like that. Then the question is, how do you apply behavioral insights when you can't run a randomized controlled trial?
Well, I mean, in a sense, it's no different from applying other insights. When you have to bring about organizational change, you find that people are sticking to old ways of working, or they interact too little with their colleagues, or they don't take into account the requirements of other people up or down the supply chain, those kind of things. Before behavioral science, we had to design interventions anyway, and it was all based on, okay, what's my best guess, my best insight at what might work here, and you really measure it on whether the result is good enough, and so in the same way as we used to do it before behavioral science, you do it now. So you know from the start that you won't be able to say, well, let's have one group doing this. Occasionally you can do. It depends. There are certain situations where you have a sufficiently large number of people where it is also technically possible, because very often your intervention is very hard to separate people. If you change the email system or something, then it's really quite hard to start distinguishing between people in one treatment group versus to another treatment group. But on occasion, you can try things out.
And I imagine it's quite hard to run like blinded studies as well, like with people working together. Like they're going to talk and realize they're in different groups or something like that.
And people know who their manager is, so it really is exactly. So it's a frustration, but it's one that I've learned to live with, and find my way around effectively. And yes, I think it would be great if you could randomize and blind trials for certain things, but it's just not going to happen. So you do the best you can with what you know, apply your insights and your best judgment, really.
So given all of these restrictions, and I have to say, I didn't even realize how many there were. I'm actually quite surprised. So far, up to date, what is the favorite type of intervention that you have run yourself, or like the most surprising results you have obtained, to the extent that you are actually allowed to share that? Because I can imagine you might be under quite a few NDAs.
Yes, of course. But I mean, I can talk in general terms. I think
Sure.
What you find is that generally the default in organizations is the use of incentives. Directly or indirectly.
I thought you were going to say it's the use of defaults. I was like, well, we know those work.
It could be just simply a bonus. If you do this, we'll pay you more. If you do this, you'll get promotion. You get some kind of benefit. Or conversely, if you don't do this, then you get sanctions and you get sort of called to the boss and stuff like that. And that is really still very much the default thinking. When you need to change people's behavior, just bribe them or punish them. And I found that a combination of moving to the other side of the spectrum, to where you either look at what people's beliefs and convictions are in their decision making. What is it they assume to be true? I mean, in one instance, we were working with it's like conventionally an internal consultancy, a very large internal consultancy, in a high tech organization. But there was both market opportunity and commercial pressure for them to gain revenue from outside.
Gotcha.
From external clients. And initially that was very hard, because the culture was very much an organization that was native. So they worked for their own factories, their own researchers and so on. So there was this sort of, we're all part of the same family. And now suddenly they had to work for strangers, effectively, the companies that they had no earlier contact with. And that took quite a while for them to change that mindset and to become more customer oriented, because if you have only one internal customer, your relationship is very different than when you have somebody who says, well, hey, and you did promise that output, that outcome by last week, where is it? Oh, yeah, okay. So there's much more formality, but also much more attention to what does the customer really want, how can we get more revenue out of the customer, not so much into how can we squeeze them, but also should we look around for what else we can do here, what other of our abilities should we market here. And over time, over 2 or 3 years, that cultural mindset had shifted quite a bit. Okay. So that everybody in the organization now had sort of the customer comes first. So that had become a sort of a totally internalized belief, an unquestioned belief, like everything else needs to be dropped when the customer calls.
Okay.
And then they had a big internal program where they tried to rationalize the number of different development approaches. It had been utterly fragmented, with literally hundreds of ways in which things were documented, things were described, and so on. So it was like a complete rat's nest. And so it needed to be simplified to I don't know, a handful, maybe half a dozen or so of approaches, and everything else would need to go out. So that's one thing. Okay, well, can we really do that? Because for this customer we need this, for that customer we need that. And secondly, there was sort of a big training program for people then to be instructed on what the retained approaches were. And what we found is that people simply didn't want to make time for it. It was not like a deliberate guerrilla war, but they just said, well, I have no time because I've got this project and that project, and this is chargeable time. And so the whole idea of the customer comes first started backfiring because people were so convinced that that was the only thing that mattered, that they were really not seeing the importance of doing this. And so the interventions that ultimately worked were, on the one hand, social proof. So seeing that other people, and particularly influential people, were beginning to say, actually, I've been to the training, I've booked myself on the training in 3 weeks' time, and make that visual. So in reception was a big screen where the figures were there, and it was not much in the beginning. So we didn't say 4% of people have signed up, but we say twice as many people signed up this week than last week because last week was only 2%. So you frame it a little bit. And secondly, there was a sort of cultural readjustment, rebalancing the firm and profound beliefs that the customer comes first. Yes, that is true, but not to the exclusion of everything else. Because in order to serve the customer, we need to have efficient operations as well. And so there was a sort of backtrack a little bit from the naive, and I think it was understandable because there was so much to be overturned at the beginning. When you have this organization that is focused on one internal customer with no commercial context and commercial trade-offs to be made, and then suddenly to get 50, 60, 70% of their revenue from outside, that requires a big cultural shift. And it just overshot a little bit. And so the combination of the social proof for, hey, this is really important, we need to do this, with a recalibration, if you like, of the credo of the company, then helped people to sort of join hands and arms and say, yeah, okay, we need to put our arms around this new approach for us, and that will be beneficial. And so obviously there was lots of smaller things around it with workshops where people could bring, hey, why do I need to do this? How's it going to work for me? And then let them work out for themselves. So in a sense, the third aspect there was perhaps the IKEA effect, in the sense that people were given sort of broad outlines and could then work out for themselves how they would make it work for them and for their clients. But there was no incentives at all in there. There's one thing I mean, it's a few years back, and I really wanted to also look at time, because obviously one of the reasons why people didn't want to go to these training courses because they have no time. So I was wondering, how could we play around with time here? But of course, it was a sort of vague idea. We didn't have any time because there was a deadline by which this needed to be.
That's kind of ironic. Yeah,
the irony is laid on thick.
Exactly, but that in a sense, it sowed the seed in my mind about the use of time. And I often, when I now work with clients, I often ask them, okay, well, if you had another 10 hours a week, how would you spend it? And it's quite revealing, because it shows where they think the trade-offs they make right now are the wrong ones.
Very good questions.
And it is quite insightful for the individual concerned as well, because they don't really think about those things in those terms. So
Koen, what's the answer to those questions for you?
If I had 10 more hours a week, I would play more music. That's
nice. Your own music or other people's music?
Both. I write music myself, and obviously I play other people's music as well.
Of course.
We've turned into behavioural grooves. Uh-oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's not go there.
I knew it was only a matter of time. Kurt, I'm coming for you.
Well, it's interesting as well, because I think with lockdown, so I've taken a look a little bit about this data now about how people's days changed, or like the hours they had available changed over lockdown, with people working from home, and so not having to commute to work, which for some people, I think the average commute was about an hour, there and back. So people sort of being given this 1 hour a day, and how did they use it? How did they reallocate their time? Obviously, loads of other things,
Yeah.
Other factors. But I think from what I was able to see, basically people just did more of the same, did more stuff that they would already do. So if you play video games, you play more video games, or if you like to exercise outdoors, you exercise more outdoors. But there wasn't really I don't know whether that could have been an opportunity to start something new, but not people.
I think so. But I think it's probably because people haven't really thought about it. They just said, "Oh, I'm home. I don't need to commute, so I have this bit more time," and it just sort of it dissipates. It's a bit like the small change in your pocket. You don't really feel that as additional money or something you can harness. I think the whole idea of mental accounting can work with time probably even better than with money. And so I think if you had asked people before they started working from home, right, so how long is your commute? An hour each way? Fine, so you have 2 hours a day. That's 10 hours a week. There we go. 10 hours a week is a nice round number. What are you going to do with it? Ooh, 10 hours, yeah. And I'm sure that at that point, if people see that's 10 hours that is theirs to use in whatever way they see fit, they would use it very differently than they did now. It just like grains of sand, it just sort of flows away between your fingers if you're not deliberate about things. And I think to me this is an important aspect of behavioral science. I think it's being deliberate. I think a lot, and I think the best nudges are the ones that sort of confront you with the fact that you're not thinking about things. So the ones that help you consider are, for me, the best nudges, because they don't push you in either direction. They only tell you, did you realize you were unthinkingly doing this? Is that what you really want? So step back, think about it, and now decide in a deliberate fashion. And I think that, to me, is something that can help a lot of people lead better lives and have higher levels of well-being by being more deliberate about how they spend their time, more even so than their money, I think. I think most people tend to be reasonably okay with their money. I mean, obviously some are not. But I think people are much more wasteful with their time than with their money.
Yeah.
I find it really interesting that you've mentioned this, because I remember there being, I think the research is relatively old, but, relatively old in my case means absolutely nothing. But there was this idea that if you wanted to increase consumer spending in your country, and you could do that through how you gave back the tax refund, that it would be much smarter to give all the tax money that it would be much smarter to give the tax money as a small percentage per month. Say that, you were supposed to be due 1,000 in total, that you spent too much in tax that the government had to give you back. If you wanted that money to be spent, and if you wanted that money to be spent back into the economy, you would have to give it back on a monthly basis, because as a percentage, it was very, very small as a part of the income, where it's just, per month, very rough calculation, it's about an additional £85. Whereas whether you give this back at the end of the year, suddenly it's like a bulk of £1,000. And if you give someone a bulk, they're going to be like, oh, this is a great amount of money. This money is salient to me. This money means something to me. Where I'm going to save at least half. So they're £500 now into your bank account, but not back into the economy. And it's only, in quotation marks here, £500 that gets spent back into the economy. So it's probably really, really important on how we phrase our additional free time that we have gained during the lockdown, because it makes so much of a difference. Like you said, telling me that I have 5 or 10 additional hours in a week just seems so much more shocking to me than I have an additional hour per day. Because what are you going to do with an hour? Might as well work a bit more. But like 5 hours in a week, that's something you can do something with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm not in the least surprised by this. I didn't know the research of the tax refund, but it completely makes sense. If it's £85 a week, it's like £22 £85 a month, £22 a week. It's I don't know, £3 a day.
Okay, you want to do this per hour as well, or?
Yeah. Well, but it's pennies a day. I mean, this is Dilip Soman's idea. But yes, I think it loses significance. It gets lost in the noise. Whereas one big amount once a year. I think there was another study also on tax refunds, on tax refunds in the US, where people treat tax refunds as a bonus.
Yep.
They don't realize this was their money all along. It was always their money. They weren't supposed to pay to the taxman, and it's just something they own, but it's seen as fantastic.
Yeah, like a windfall.
So people feel unrealistically and totally irrationally happy with the tax refund. Whereas if you get a tax bill at the end of the year, in fact, you should be very pleased. This money has been mine. I've been able to. So it's only now that I need to pay it. I've been able to use it for such a long time. So yeah, the framing is very important. And I think again, we can use exactly the same thing when we talk about time.
I think it's probably just a bit harder to reframe time. Money, you can decide when you divide it up. Time, it's a little, if everyone has 5 minutes extra a day, you can maybe reframe it as that's an extra day a year. But
it's true, and obviously the 5 minutes that have just gone are lost forever. I can't get those back, and you do see, well, I wouldn't get that time back of whatever, wasting time watching a stupid movie or something. However, I think again you can think about things. Okay, I've got 10 minutes now. Is there something useful I can do in these 10 minutes? So how I manage my time, I wish I had double the time I have and I could still fit it. So I'm quite conscious of trying to be efficient with my time. But I always have lots of things I can do, even in snippets of 10 minutes. So I rarely waste 10 minutes by saying, okay, well, I'm just going to sort of look at the clouds go by or something. There's always something I can do, if only catching up with my Twitter feed. But I find that for me, it's not just wasting time like some people do on social media. For me, it is primarily a stream of information that, that's an interesting paper, that's an interesting article. And it provides me with true utility for me. And so whether it's that or something else, I always have something to do. And that means I can bring stuff forward. Okay, I could have done it tomorrow, but you know what? I can do it now. And then I will have another gap tomorrow I can use for something else. So in that sense, I think mentally accounting for your time can help you make better use of that ultimate scarce resource that we all, no matter how rich or poor we are, we only have 24 hours a day, 1,440 minutes.
The great equalizer.
Okay.
However you cut it up, it's limited, and what's gone is gone.
Yeah, as terrifying as that is.
Oh God, I'm having an existential crisis right now. I'm looking at the clock. 45 minutes of our lives have gone now, but they've been recorded, so that's all right for prosperity.
But they were very entertaining. They were very educational, and I think they were very useful. So in that case, but I find it quite interesting, Koen, that you mentioned that, if you have a gap of 10 minutes somewhere, might as well fill it with something useful. But there seems to have been a type of counter movement, I think is the best way of putting it, where people are going a bit against this idea of that all your time has to be spent in a useful manner, because apparently it's creating an entire burnout generation. So how do we spend time wisely, given that it's such a scarce resource?
It's it's exactly the same thing as using square footage efficiently in a town, for instance. Urban planning, obviously you say, well, we can build sort of a 40-story building here, look at how much value we could create there, but you need parks as well. So you actually plan that there will be a park or 2 square kilometers. And in the same way, I will use 10 minutes to do something useful, but I can use 10 minutes to play a video game, or I can spend 25 minutes watching South Park or something. And I'm quite happy doing that. So, I had quite a severe depression about 15 years ago, which was exactly the kind of thing that you described, serious burnout, really not knowing which way to go anymore. And that sort of woke me up in terms of being more deliberate about where my time and my attention went. Okay. And so on the one hand, I try to be as efficient as possible with my time, but I treat relaxation as seriously as anything else. And so if I feel I need relaxation, I will make time for relaxation, and I will not do anything else but watch TV or go for a walk or whatever. Because at that moment, that is what provides me with the most utility.
And it's reframing that.
Oh, cool. Yeah. You seem so optimized.
The perfect economist. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's
we
great.
have found him. He's an engineer.
I love
That's
it.
what it took for economics to become ideal. The Homo economicus is an engineer. There
Well,
you go.
I think somebody once said I should call myself a behavioral engineer, and in a way, I think it does make sense. I mean, I haven't really adopted the moniker. I mean, the accidental behavioral economist goes back a long time, and it's just there. I don't really.
It's famous, so
come on. Yes, I'm not gonna take it off now, but in a way, I think, particularly in organizations, what you do is behavioral engineering, in the sense that engineering is applied science. It is not pure science, so you need to look at the context where you apply things, and engineering also means sort of, it's not bending the rules. Obviously, you're not going to make something that will break, but there is a sort of, oh well, let's just add a bit of this, then we're safe. There's a sort of a pragmatism about engineering that you don't find in pure science, and so from that perspective, I think I'm more of a behavioral engineer than I'm certainly by no means a behavioral scientist, but I apply behavioral science as an engineer would, I think. So even though I don't do real engineering stuff, I haven't been doing for a long time, I like to think that some of my training and education is casting its shadow to right now in how I approach the organizational problems I look at, looking at it as an engineer, looking at what the science says, looking at my experience, and combining it and putting it in the pot in a sort of ready, steady cook way, stirring the pot, putting it on the stove, and just being reasonably confident that what comes out of the pot in the end will be quite nice, maybe really nice.
Hopefully edible.
Hopefully edible, yeah. But yes, it is a bit like when I cook also. I have the recipe for me is a guideline.
That's how I bake. Doesn't always end well.
Well, yeah, sometimes it doesn't end well, but then you learn something. You learn, okay, well, probably putting 5 times as much garlic in my Madeira cake is not a good idea. So,
yes, it is.
I was going to say you could never have too much garlic, and then you said Madeira cake, and I was like, okay. In that case, that's the one example where too much garlic is not a good idea. Yeah. So, I mean, it's great to hear that you are a hybrid of sorts. We love hybrids on this show. So bringing a different perspective, a different training to the application of behavioral science and sort of enriching the discipline as well. I think that's one of the most exciting and interesting things about being in this world, is that it's accessible through so many different routes and successfully so. And I mean, we've talked about so much today. We've talked about time. We've talked about, applying behavioral insights within organizations. We've talked a little bit about ready, steady, cook for some reason, which I didn't see coming, but I'm not mad at it. But I mean, I'm interested in sort of hearing from you what your opinion is or your perspective is of where are we going to be in the next 5 years. I mean, we've seen such a rapid cycles of change through behavioral science. I mean, what comes next is the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really hard one, because it could go many ways. I think we have seen the proliferation of different directions here. My hope is that behavioral science will spread even more widely, and as you said, bring in insights from other disciplines, from anthropology as much as from chemistry. Because you could say, well, what else has chemistry got to do with it? But I think the models that chemistry uses, for me, and I guess it's also my consulting career that plays through, you never know what's going to come in handy when. Mm-hmm. So you need to be a bit of a sponge as an applied behavioral scientist. Maybe not as a behavioral scientist. Maybe you need to focus there. You need to focus on one thing and one thing only. Maybe on tribalism or on poverty or whatever, and that's fine. I think I think we need that as well in behavioral science. But I think at the applied end, we need to look much wider. We need to look at what can be useful. What can we learn from totally unrelated fields as well as from adjacent fields. And so for me, that's part of the growing up process for behavioral science. It's shedding the old skin and becoming bigger. And embracing more. And it will be harder, of course, because there might be factions in the broader behavioral science community that is uneasy with this and want to keep some kind of purism going. That's not me. I think anything
it's not
goes.
us either.
And I think at the end of the day, what we try to do is to understand why people do what they do and why they don't do what they don't do. And if, for whatever reason, it would be better for people to do something else, then how can we help them do what is better and stop doing what is not so good? That is the ultimate question that we always come back to. And I think the current canon of behavioral science is not complete. It doesn't have everything we need to answer those questions. So we need to keep on looking and add more to our arsenal to apply this. And it is in part behavioral science, social science more widely, but also other disciplines, I think, have stuff to offer for us to understand better why people do what they do and don't do what they don't do.
Yeah, that seems very fair. So, I mean, let's just hope that your hope for behavioral science is what actually is going to happen, because I am a great proponent of behavioral science absorbing even more fields, if that's the correct way of putting it.
We could talk to you for hours and hours on end, but we know that time is a scarce resource. So thank you so much for spending your precious time with us today. We've really appreciated it. Thank you for coming on.
It was my pleasure. It was planned, and I looked forward to it, and it hasn't disappointed.
Yes, I hope it was more relaxation rather than work. I hope it didn't feel too much work.
Well,
talking to us.
I think much of my time is actually a bit of both, because I love what I do, and so reading a paper, is that work, or is it learning, or is it just sheer enjoyment of finding out something new? Well, it's a bit of everything.
Depends on the quality of the paper.
And it's a bit like being able to spend every pound 3 times. So every minute I can spend it 3 times, because it is work, it is relaxation, it's leisure, sometimes even more than that. So that's the way to get more out of your time.
Oh my God.
I love it.
So optimized.
Yes, and I hope we were worth the investment, because yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Without any doubt, yeah, it's my pleasure. It was great being on your podcast. I enjoyed it hugely.
Well, that was our conversation with the accidental behavioural scientist, Koen Smets. I mean, I thought it was an amazing conversation. I learned so much about how difficult it is to apply behavioural science. And, I think most of my knowledge or reference points for applications of behavioural science is really from the point of government and public policy. But to hear how difficult it can be and how different it has to be to work within firms, it was really interesting, has really expanded my horizons on that. I don't know, what did you think, Melle? What stood out to you about our conversation?
I think it was very much the same as you just highlighted. I remember the conversation we had with Nila, where we actually discussed the true cost of putting in a nudge, or true cost of actually putting in an intervention. And I think those are very, very different from a government perspective and from a company's perspective, where, a company will have quite a lot of things running this, where it might just be scalability, the number of people that they can implement this on, or just the fact that, this could be very, very disruptive towards what's actually going on in the firm at the expense of, for example, profits or productivity, which is obviously not something a firm wants. And
right.
These are aspects that I do think are very rarely discussed when discussing, how to set up an intervention, what type of intervention, and the caveats that you should look into. And I think, organizational change, as Koen said, is kind of, not the top 3, if you will, of implementations of behavioral science. And I can see why it isn't, because it's quite difficult. And when I say quite difficult, I mean a fucking hell.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing. Just to, the default would be to try and set up a randomized controlled trial, test a couple of things, see what works, look at the mechanisms. But when you can't even have randomization, or because people within the company, they all work together, you can't do a double-blinded trial, then how do you determine causality? And when you can't determine causality, then how do you apply behavioral insights? Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. But I think maybe we need to be moving a bit away from more quantitative methods, focusing more on qualitative stuff. I don't know. I feel like then all my training is not relevant, but I don't know.
Text analysis is not something they properly trained me in, but I could get there. I know how to run some type of these models in R. I can watch a couple of YouTube tutorials, get me there. But no, it's just really interesting because it really doesn't get talked about that much. Or maybe it's just because we're academics that, we just haven't opened our eyes yet to this discussion. But I don't remember being taught much about it when still in an MSc either. But it's really, really problematic because, like you said, you can't run randomized control trials. You can't blind anyone, like not even double blind. You can't single blind them either. And and even if you were to run qualitative type studies, I think a lot of people would be very careful about what they indicate, in how their perceptions, their opinions, their behavior has changed. Because when push comes to shove, this is not just, the government who's kind of like, whatever. This is your employer. And that kind of is not the vibe you want to set for someone being very honest about what's going on with them. It's very, very difficult. Very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of imagine that, I guess, qualitative approaches are actually quite useful in the diagnostic stage of trying to figure out what is a behavior that, or not just a behavior, beliefs or expectations of the company, or, happiness, anything like that. What should be moved, or what are sort of the underlying mechanisms, or what is really the root of the problem. And I think, well, what really kind of struck me about our conversation was how within behavioral science, we're always talking about, it's like, does it replicate across cultures? And within each individual firm or business or company, you have like this intersection between, the culture, wherever that a firm is geographically located, and where the people live and work and come from, but also you have that intersected with a whole different company culture. And so trying to understand and share best practice, like I think Koen was right on the money. We need to have like a better resources to figure out what worked for other people and why, and like be able to share that knowledge. I mean, that's I think how we're gonna improve. But it's again not an easy thing. It's not like we're dealing with the government where they're happy to be transparent with, well, not happy, but are obliged to be transparent with their processes. I think that is a really important point to raise. I think a lot of companies, like, let alone if they even put out these things, and they, it's difficult to move things in from one context to another. So I have a feeling if you ran something in PwC, it's not going to run the same in a Bain, or pick another one, EY Parthenon. I don't even know which one. Just pick one. But oh my God, your acronym knowledge is incredible.
My acronym knowledge is on point. But I mean, for example, like these companies are at least like all still very consultancy based. But like take that to a Caterpillar, for example, and it might become a bit different. Or take it to Ford, or like a heavy grounded production company, and God knows how that would scale, or if that would scale at all. But I mean, that is then one thing, but them not sharing resources. I mean, and on the one hand, I get it, because you're in a very competitive market, and one thing that works for you, the fact that it worked for you is great, but you might want to keep that in-house. But still, I wish Koen the best of luck with trying to figure out how to build this resource. Once it comes out, I'm sure I'll be happy to buy it.
So, I mean, I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on Koen's Twitter feed and blog feed as well, just to keep an eye out for when these new resources are going to be coming about. Because, I think there's going to be something special happening there. Fingers crossed. So that was the episode, guys. Thank you for coming along with us on this journey. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you learned something. And we hope to see you in the next one. If you enjoyed the episode, please get in touch with us on our social media. Everything will be linked down below. And of course, we urge you to follow the Accidental Behavioural Scientist. We think he's great. And there's a lot more content he's putting out that, you better keep your eye on. So that's it for us this week. Thank you, guys. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you when we see you.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the one I love, you're the one I wanna give to.